Hello, hello, welcome, welcome. Okay, guys, we're going to start by getting everyone a little bit involved. Now, it is dark, so don't worry, no one's going to see what we're about to do.
Yeah.
So, if everyone could just put one of their hands over their eyes, or just close your eyes and raise your hand if you have ever gone to therapy, or are seeing a therapist, or are actively considering therapy as part of your life going forward. Yeah. Wow. Like, I would say that is genuinely about 70%, which is incredible. Good. Rob, I think, doesn't this just show us where we're at in terms of therapy 2.0 and where psychedelics might fit into everything?
Yeah.
Talk to me about therapy in 2021.
I think there's been an enormous awareness of the mental health problem that has been there for a long time, but has been much more openly discussed and has been growing in recent years. I think everyone coming out of the last 2 years of the pandemic now has experienced some level of anxiety or challenges mentally. So I think it's a fantastic thing that we see so many people engaging in this, and we hope to have a new path in the future.
Because that's right. Like the first thing that you can do on the step to managing your mental health is like kind of admitting to yourself and being vulnerable and saying, I want help.
That's
or
right.
I need help, you know?
Absolutely. No, I think awareness is often used in a number of fields, but it's especially important here, and it's the first row.
And now, in terms of your work with MindMed, I think a lot of us would struggle to rattle off an elevator pitch on psychedelics if we were asked to. I certainly would.
Yeah.
So tell me, what comes under like the umbrella of psychedelics and your work with MindMed?
Yes, so we have a number of programs. So we have multiple molecules we're developing, one of which I think everyone will have heard of in some capacity is LSD, which we're developing for generalized anxiety disorder. We also have other related molecules to the classic psychedelics, that some of which are not even hallucinogens, some of which do not have the consciousness or perception altering aspects, but we're developing for a number of different disease indications, for opioid withdrawal, for anxiety, ADHD, and we just recently announced a new program for the R enantiomer of MDMA to look at patients with autism spectrum disorder.
Yeah. And I think if we think about therapy within the context of healthcare, you know, like it is famously the problem of our time, isn't it? That healthcare, as it is, the world over, is reactive rather than proactive. So tell me how your work with MindMed and psychedelics, the whole area of psychedelics, can kind of start to give us tools to help us to be more proactive with managing our health, because it's about the tools, isn't it?
I think it is, and you know, very much you look at the importance of reimbursement and the availability of mental health care and psychotherapy and throughout the world, and for us in the States in particular. It's something that's not paid for very often, and it's very hard to access at a high level, and so if we can bring new tools into the market which allow sort of an acceleration of the therapeutic process, we certainly think that's a great advantage to mental health.
And tell me about therapy and psychedelics side by side. Like, can you have one without the other? Like, is it complementary? Talk to me about like that kind of like that sort of dual sort of like toolkit, if you will.
It is a very interesting topic, and one that is not settled yet. So I think the common thinking is that psychotherapy is an essential component of delivering psychedelics, and we certainly think it's advantageous. I mean, of course, our chief medical officer is a psychiatrist. We all have a great respect and value for psychotherapy. There is an interesting question that we need to answer as a field of whether or not it is required to have a benefit with the psychedelics, or if it's just an additive benefit, because we know, for instance, that with SSRIs and the standard antidepressants, you see improvements with the addition of psychotherapy. So it's an open question and something we really need to fully explore.
Yeah, one that I don't have the answer to, or you, or I don't think anyone in this room as well. And when it comes to, say, healthcare, like the system itself, and when you're getting investment and everything, tell me what the kind of like where you are at with the investment in MindMed at the moment.
Yeah, so we are happy to say we are a publicly traded company on the NASDAQ. We've had enormous investor support historically.
So we can all get on board. We can all get involved.
We can all get on board, We're excited to welcome everyone who wants to get on the MindMed journey with us. And We have a market cap of about $1 billion, and we've had a lot of investor support to date, and looking to build on that into the next months and years.
Right, and bring us into the room with investors, and when you're trying to raise, and obviously you're not doing too badly. Obviously the conversations are going well, but is there far more openness now to that area of psychedelics, and what are the key questions that they have for you when they're a little bit cautious, when they're like, psychedelics, hallucinogenics, what are the key questions for them to kind of get on board, for them to sort of come in and support?
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily what most of us would expect. So most of investors who are familiar with investing in the pharmaceutical world, and CNS in particular, are very supportive and open, and have gotten very quickly on board with the approach of psychedelics. The biggest questions ultimately end up around intellectual property, around how we're going to actually deliver these therapies, because if it's a many hour, 8, 10, 12 hour trip, for lack of a better word, or treatment session, it's an open question of how are we going to get these out into the broader world. And we have some really important ideas we think that will be able to facilitate the more generalizable accessibility of these therapies. But ultimately everyone wants to know, it's one thing to get a drug approved, it's another thing to get it out to the world. I think we've seen with the COVID vaccines, for instance. And so we need to be thinking about how we can deliver this at scale so that everyone in need can access it as well.
Yes, and you mentioned COVID there, the big C word. How has it changed your business and your focus, and are you seeing that more than ever? The work that you do is so important. How take us through the last kind of few months, and how the pandemic has impacted you guys.
Yeah, we see just throughout the world there are a number of statistics that speak to the growth in mental health issues over the last several decades, but especially over the last 2 years. It affects everyone everywhere in the world, and we've seen an enormous growth, particularly in adolescents and children. And ultimately, I think coming out of the pandemic, this is not a problem that's going to go away just because we have worldwide vaccination, or we enter the other side of it. It's going to be a problem that's with us for many years to come, and one we hope to really have an impact on. Yeah,
and if we think about, again, more tools in the armor kit, I think, if we're thinking about mental health and how we have traditionally sort of what were our go-tos traditionally, antidepressants is something that was kind of like a go-to, wasn't it? Especially from doctors just prescribing, off you go. Is that more of a band-aid though? It's more of a temporary fix rather than curing the long-term problem. And how does psychedelics change? How does psychedelics work differently to help us with our mental health?
Yeah, SSRIs are a wonder drug in many respects. I mean, they're fantastic, and they have had a huge impact helping patients throughout psychiatry and mental health. There are problems though. A lot of patients don't like the side effects. They are not effective in everyone. We have a number of antidepressants, and still many patients fail multiple antidepressants, and they're indicated for a number of psychiatric diseases. They're also they're relatively safe molecules, so we see that they get broadly prescribed and they're highly accessible. So I think we don't want to turn our back on the treatment options available, but the psychedelics offer an entirely new treatment paradigm, one where you have a single or only a few dosing sessions, and the effects seem to persist for many months, the positive effects of those sessions. And so ultimately we need to prove out how long it lasts, how effective it is, how safe it is to administer. But if we have this new tool in our arsenal to fight mental health, then it'd be a revolutionary change in how we think about mental health and the treatment of psychiatric disorders. Exactly.
And are you having conversations with doctors specializing in mental health and psychiatrists and everything? What are those conversations like? Are they skeptical still?
I'm very happy to say they're not. No, I think if anything, we've seen in psychiatry an enormous interest, just an enormous support.
Because I think they're looking at I think I don't have the statistics right now, but I feel like we could almost say that we're kind of in the middle of a mental health crisis the world over. I feel like it's never been more on people's lips before, but like, you know, this is the first step. People are like admitting that they need help, you know, and like that's the first step. As long as you just need to start talking about it. But so are they at a point now where they're like, hey, let's be open to everything? Because they're saying that actually traditional medicine, like, well, it obviously hasn't worked, you know?
I think so, and I think that psychiatrists in particular feel well equipped because they have such a deep understanding of the therapeutic process and such deep insights into psychiatric disorders that they see this again as a new tool that could be completely revolutionary. And I think if you imagine their craft, they have been working in a space where there's been almost no innovation for the last 20, 30 years. So to see an entirely new approach, one that we've seen, for instance, LSD we know has been dosed in clinical studies in over 1,000 patients. Relatively safe from the data we have, seems to work well in a number of important and intractable conditions. And so to have a new tool like that for physicians is an incredible advance.
Do you think that we will get to a point where it will be more freely available, like a side by side with traditional medicine, like on prescriptions?
Certainly, you know, I think as we reach approval, that's the goal, of course. I think the concept here is that one day you go to your doctor, and instead of them saying, well, I'm going to give you a prescription for Zoloft or Prozac, they say, well, those are options, but we could also try LSD, or we could try psilocybin, or we could explore these other options. We see an enormous growth in the availability of ketamine and esketamine. Not a psychedelic, but you know, parallel kind of concept where it's an entirely new treatment approach. It's something that really could change the landscape.
And do you think we ever will cure mental illness? I know it's a massive question, but I feel there is more of a kind of like an admitting, but there's more people are more inclined to kind of seek out tools now, aren't they? Whereas before we just kind of we were just like, okay, well, I'm having an off day, hopefully tomorrow will be better. Whereas I feel people are actually putting time, money, resources into looking after their mental health, aren't they?
I think like with many areas of medicine, early intervention is an important thing, and so I wouldn't
being proactive rather than reactive.
Well said. I think we would never use the cure word to say that we're going to cure mental health or even necessarily cure a particular disease. It's something that is a great ambition, but something that is very, very hard and unlikely to be done completely. What we do think we can do is change the course of an individual's disease. And if we can ultimately
so you're changing like the pathway of like from like diagnosis to cure.
I think that's right. I think if you think of someone's life progressing down a series of junctures, and you can think of a sort of branching path of life, and if you can intervene early and in a way that really resets the trajectory and puts them in a direction where they can have long-term improvements, the drug doesn't have to be present chronically to have a chronic impact.
And tell me what is the focus for you guys over the next like 2022? What's the big plan? Because if you're a public company now, like we all can get involved.
We have a number of trials that we're getting started, phase 2 clinical trials, one of LSD and generalized anxiety disorder by the end of this year, another in adult ADHD. We have a program that's going into opioid withdrawal treatment that will be starting in 2022. And so really it's advancing our drug development programs, building on the pipeline we have, ultimately trying to go as efficiently and quickly as possible towards regulatory approvals.
And are you focused on any particular geography at all? Like America or Europe or where, like are you seeing kind of more of a will in certain areas rather than like some more than others?
Certainly our focus initially is on the US and Europe, and looking for approvals in those two geographies. Beyond that,
there's a lot of politics involved, I'd say. Is there, like, in terms of like with healthcare and?
I think I would
big conversations.
I'd say there's a big conversation, and not so much politics as it is just getting through administrative processes and engaging proactively. With, for instance, in the U.S., the DEA and FDA, I think they need to be commended as publicly as possible for the endorsement that they've given in allowing these to proceed. I think what we could ask for is an objective consideration or reconsideration of the psychedelics, and that's what we've gotten so far. So we're really happy with the partnerships we've been able to develop there, and look forward to growing on those.
Yeah, well, a lot done, more to do.
Yes.
Always more to do. Amazing. Rob, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.